Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today we have the pleasure of watching SphinxPit playing in their Tier 5 premium tank destroyer. It is the SU-85I, and well, this is, I would say this is one of the games of the year, but somehow this one slipped under my radar. This game is actually from 2023, but I have no idea how I missed it. This is one of the games of 2023, and the reason why I'm going down the backlog of incredible games of the SU-85I is there's an opportunity over the next 5 to 6 weeks for you to be able to get this tank completely for free just by tuning into streams such as mine on Twitch TV. The token store is back. It's been on hiatus since the end of last year, or in the start of this year in January, as it was just finishing off, and there's an opportunity to get one of 2 premium tanks completely for free just for watching streams. The first one is going to be the SU-85I, and the second one is going to be the Dickomax, which we'll be talking about a little bit more in a second, with an equally awesome game in that Tier 6 German tank destroyer. So, the SU-85I, is this the one that you should pick for your tokens? Maybe. Do you like to have great damage per minute, Tier 5, which has pretty comfortable matchmaking, at least unless you're getting into your Tier 6 and Tier 7 tanks very, very quickly. The vehicle's got good camo. It's got enough view range. It's got enough firepower. This vehicle, the only thing it really lacks is, I guess, the armor and the hit points. You're kind of getting one-shot by KV2s, which is a little bit depressing, right? And your armor, you've only got 60 millimeters, so it's not going to be working out at all with regards to the armor on this tank. You might be able to bounce some HE rounds. You might occasionally be able to bounce some really low caliber guns from the Tier 4 tanks that you meet, but mostly, yeah, the armor isn't going to work. So this is kind of like your glass cannon damage dealer, tank destroyer, and as we're going to see, SphinxPit is going to show you exactly why this thing is very, very deadly, as they're going to enter into a one versus many situation. So in this kind of a scenario, SphinxPit basically just wants to get some damage downrange at this Churchill 3, seeing if they're going to come out into the bush. You know, they've elected to try and keep the combat at long range, and this is exactly where you need to have a glass cannon tank destroyer. Both of the vehicles that you could choose with the tokens that you can get from Twitch drops are glass cannon tank destroyers that want to be played at long range. This one doesn't have the gun depression. Its gun depression is only 5 degrees, as I'm going to show you with the Dickomax in a second. The Dickomax can actually be very flexible indeed. But both of the times you want to try and get the combat at long range as far as is possible. With a setup on this tank, probably use binoculars or coated optics, depending on whether you have a good crew and depending on whether you have a premium consumable that you're willing to use on this tank. And then on top of that, probably something like gun rammer and vents will work very well on this tank. The penetration on its standard rounds, it's alright. You know, 119 millimeters, it's okay for Tier 5. The gold rounds have 161, however. And that's more than enough to get through the front of all but the most well-armored Tier 7s that you're going to have to deal with. And it doesn't look like SphinxPit believes in anything past the 8 times zoom. As somebody who got glasses for the first time last year, I feel like I'm having to... You've got better eyes than I do, mate, at least without my glasses in this kind of a scenario. These long ranges. Definitely doesn't believe in going past the 8 times zoom. There's quite a few players who I've seen that do that, and either I guess they're using some kind of custom zoom, but why wouldn't that show up in World of Tanks if someone is using some kind of custom zoom? You'll probably bug out the replay file. Maybe SphinxPit is just of the opinion that they don't need those extra zooms, and they've got enough pixels and enough mouse control to be able to do what they need to do here. So this tank, look, when it gets going, man, this rate of fire is scary. This is 2,100 damage per minute at Tier 5. It's a lot like the SU-76 up at Tier 5, but just so much more comfortable with the way that this gun performs. Okay, so SphinxPit, deciding that there's no opportunity really to engage the Churchill anymore, is electing to go even further back. They're going to go and try and use the pretty darn good camo rating that this vehicle has. It has 20% when it's stationary. That's incredibly good. And it even has 12% where it's moving. So this vehicle, when it's firing, kind of has the same camo rating as the concept does, more like the concept or the E50M does, which is actually pretty outrageous. So this thing, when it gets going, it really does. Accordingly, if you're someone who does not mind using a camo net, I wouldn't really recommend it, but you could kind of pseudo-play this thing. A bit like it's an E25. And it does maintain a lot of its camera rating when it's firing compared to a lot of other vehicles. So SphinxPit is really just electing to not fire those gold rounds early on in this game. Now they've only got 2 regular rounds left, 30 gold rounds. Probably would have been better to dump the gold rounds at the Valiant there to be able to get rid of them, and then to save some of those standard rounds for some of the lightly armored tanks. And yeah, boys and girls, let's just pause this situation. 1 versus 11. Take it away, SphinxPit. 3,000 hit points on the enemy team. 500 hit points on SphinxPit's tank. And it looks like, unfortunately for SphinxPit, the enemy know exactly where he is, and they're already starting to try and blind fire the bushes. So in this kind of a situation, the most important thing that you need to do is only fire through bushes when they're opaque. If the bushes are transparent, that means your opponents are going to be able to spot you. But man, the camera rating on this vehicle and the view range against the SAV there easily allows SphinxPit to be able to spot and shoot through. So 1 versus 11 becomes 1 versus 10, and oh my word, talk about spotting 4 tanks at the same time. Luckily, SphinxPit has the gold loaded now. They finish off the Churchill at first, and that Hetzer, if they had better view range, they'd be able to spot him there. Luckily, that's not the case. 1 shot into the SU-85, falls back behind the bush once again, and now it's SU-85 versus SU-85I, and I'd definitely rather be in the premium tank in this scenario rather than the one with terrible view range that's advancing at the premium tank. And SphinxPit quickly dispatches another 3 vehicles. Now with 7 tanks left on the enemy team, make that 6 tanks left on the enemy team. But unfortunately for SphinxPit, those one-shot tanks seem to be all dealt with now, and now it's more healthy tanks that they're going to have to deal with. I mean, how bizarre is this? That 1 versus 11 now being changed into a 1 versus 6. They've already handled 5 tanks single-handedly. That would be a Kolobanov's on its own. But SphinxPit is still going to have to deal with 6 tanks on the enemy team if they want to get the medal that everybody wants, right? So SphinxPit just absolutely toying with their opponents here, using these bushes with absolute precision. Looks like the Matilda, are they actually trying to drive away in this scenario? Well, they might be speed running into the garage there. The Chihi using the bushes to try and continue to get some vision on this very sneaky Sphinx that is marauding at the back of the map. The BDR now a 1-shot. To the garage with you, Adam. SphinxPit now on 9 kills in the SU-85I, making use of all that is good about this tank. Really good gun handling, nice rate of fire, pretty darn good alpha. 160 alpha is not bad for tier 5. It's not great, but it's not bad. But when you combine it with that rate of fire and the gun handling and the gold rounds on this vehicle with that 161 pen, yeah, when this thing gets going, it certainly does. So SphinxPit, unable to see who's capping right now, but goes forwards, and it is a full health Matilda. He's going to shoot through the bush, and because it's opaque and not transparent, that means that they're not going to reveal their vehicle, but they're going to have to hit that Matilda another 3 times if they want to remove them from this game. There's still a Valiant on the enemy team. There's still a Panzer IIIJ, which luckily hasn't pushed from the side. What the enemy team really should be doing right now is trying to cross this little gap in the river, or the fjord here, or use the ford on the fjord to be able to cross and be able to proxy spot out SphinxPit, but doesn't look like they just quite know what's happening. SphinxPit is using high-end game mechanics from clearly a great player against low-tier players who just can't seem to comprehend what is happening to them. And a 1 versus 11 is now a 1 versus 3. This might be one of the most ridiculous Kolobanov's medals I have ever seen. SphinxPit making his opponents look like absolute chumps, but that was the first time they didn't actually fully reverse behind the bushes there. But still, doesn't get spotted. The Chihi shut down, and now SphinxPit turns their attention towards the Matilda. 1, follow it up with 2. Will they be able to hit the front of that vehicle? 3, there we go. And will there be 4? Oh, yes, there will. And that 1 versus 11 is now a 1 versus 1 against a Valiant who seems to be a 1-shot. And oh, how the turns have tabled. 3,000 hit points of the enemy team reduced to 176. And SphinxPit hasn't even lost a single hit point yet. Let them respawn, right? I mean, How unbelievable is this game, man? Absolutely unbelievable. A 1 versus 11 that SphinxPit has killed 12 out of 15 players on the enemy team with 1 left over. And they haven't even taken a hit point of damage. If you want to know how to use bushes in World of Tanks, that's pretty much it. However, your results may vary if you're not playing a tank that has good camo rating after it fires, and if you're playing against higher tier vehicles which have better view range. Vehicles like the Sav, vehicles like the Hetzer, they're all tanks that have terrible view range. And so that means that SphinxPit can be a lot more aggressive with taking chances against those vehicles, because their poor view range will just get cancelled out by the bush mechanics that SphinxPit was using. And all that's left now is one Valiant, who is going to try and put a Valiant fight up here against SphinxPit, who doesn't repair their fuel tank. A little bit dangerous to not repair the fuel tank there if they were to get set on fire, but the looks, good job. Very good job indeed. Just an unbelievable game of World of Tanks. 4,000 damage, 13 kills. SphinxPit, what an incredible result. So before we jump into the Dickomax game, if you want to be able to get your hands on either the Dickomax or the SU-85I, you're going to have to collect yourself 45 Twitch drop tokens. And you can get 5 every stream 3 times a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, meaning that if you want to get one of the tanks, you'll have to tune in for 9 streams out of the 17 total. And if you don't really care about the tanks or you've already got them, you can get a variety of cool things like a 3D style for the IS-2, which I don't... IS-2 I should say, which I don't even have myself, the Sheridan, or get yourself some premium time, consumables, equipment, and some fancy 2D stars for your vehicles. So next up, making a case that you should pick the Dickomax, MrRogo93 from the European server, and they've had a fairly typical game for a Dickomax for the first 3 minutes of this battle. They're in a not awful matchup against tier 8 vehicles, and they've played defensively, as you should do in a glass cannon tank destroyer with good view range to try and snipe in, provide a few opportunities, but unfortunately the enemy team has just been playing very tight, and it's just one of those kind of games where I think you got to just make the most of it. Both of these tank destroyers will obviously do way better in good matchups than they will do in these stinky matchups indeed. But what you're going to see is that if you're a decent player like MrRogo is, that you can make these vehicles do some pretty awesome things. So, the Dickomax, what's special about this vehicle? Well, funnily enough, what's special about this tank is the view range, 400 meters, and also the gun depression. 15 degrees of gun depression. This vehicle can pretty much just shoot right down over the hull, and that makes it very, very flexible on a ridgeline. Accordingly, the kind of positions that you can get your Dickomax into is it's wonderful, really, what you can do with this vehicle. Any ridgeline is an opportunity for you to be able to surprise your opponents. Get above them, and they are going to be wincing at having a vehicle that a lot of people look at as an awful tank, starting to make fun of them indeed. On top of this, the vehicle's got some okay penetration. You know, 169 on the standard rounds, but 227 on the premium rounds. That's decent. And 300 alpha, it hits hard. It's not going to be like an SU-100 using the 122mm, but that vehicle doesn't have the view range. It definitely doesn't have the accuracy. And this vehicle does feel like a different class of tank. When you combine that with a steady hand and good marksmanship, you can really get some punishment in. A lot like with the previous vehicle, this tank's camo rating, it's not bad. Again, you've got 10 when moving, 5 when firing when you're stationary, and that's something that I never really consider about low-tier tank destroyers, is that sometimes just sitting still and letting your gun sing and just hoping that your opponents have bad view range, which is a lot more likely to happen at low tier, can actually really work out for you. Especially these old-school premium tank destroyers, although I would still recommend a setup like you see MrRogo using here. However, when you get all of the field mods, if you have a good crew and a premium consumable, you could probably end up dropping coated optics on this tank. And then I would say use vents, but you can't because it's open top, right? So you might even want to use an aiming device to try and improve the accuracy of the vehicle. Or alternatively, you could even get an exhaust on this tank and make it sneaky getting into position. But 100% use the gun rammer, 100% use the turbo, and then just use that final pick for being flexible. But you know what? If you do use coated optics on this tank with a good crew, man, you're packing like 500 meters view range, and you're really going to be able to outspot a lot of different tanks. So maybe that's the way to go on this vehicle. You can have 2 builds for 2 different maps at tier 6, so it's pretty flexible there. I have to admit, it's really cool that Wargaming allow me to give out thousands, if not like tens of thousands of these tanks each token store. That's a lot of money, right? What is this thing usually worth in the shop? Like $10? $10? If this thing's worth $10 in the shop, I'm giving away like is that really how much it scales? Wow, I'm giving away like tens of thousands, if not like 100, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of premium tanks just for people watching my streams. It's a really nice thing that Wargaming do. Wargaming, a massive thank you from me. I just wish that you'd never made it so that people also have to tune in on Wednesday, God forbid, to have to be able to pick up these tokens as well. All right, so MrRogo is like, shut up, Uncle Scrubs. Just focus on me right now because I am kicking butt, lots of butt. They reduce the Skoda T25 to a one-shot, but unfortunately the Jagdpanzer, luckily, with a stock gun, starts to go to town. And if that Jagdpanzer 4 had the 88mm, yeah, MrRogo would not have been in this game. So now it's MrRogo and a Saladin versus 7 vehicles on the enemy team. Make that 6 with MrRogo93 shutting down the Czech auto-loading medium. Definitely one of the best tier 6 tanks in the game now, Skoda T25. An absolute beast, even with the nerfs. But this Dickermax definitely making the case here with a very respectable 2,800 combined so far, and a lot left to do in this game. With the Saladin unfortunately down to 13 hit points there. It's MrRogo who has the 18 hit points. Yeah, this is starting to look ugly. Luckily, MrRogo finishes off the T-34-2 GFT. And does that mean that the Saladin's going to handle the SU-100? Unfortunately, it doesn't. But luckily, the SU-100 goes forwards, allowing MrRogo to be able to get an extra shot in. And will he be able to find the extra shot in here? Oh no, disaster! And with all of MrRogo's premium rounds fired, they only have standard ammunition left. But luckily, all of the enemy vehicles now are glass cannons. But with 6 AP shells and 5 vehicles left on the enemy team, including 2 artillery, will it become a case of MrRogo having to use high explosive rounds to stand a chance against those artillery? Well, we're gonna have to find out. So this is just the dream scenario, really, for the Dickermax. A lovely, wide line of bushes that they can be able to use to outspot their opponents and stay hidden and not make it obvious which bush they're in. They've got all this area to kind of play around with here and try and spot out and talk about spot out. There's that Jagdpanzer 4 that was punishing MrRogo earlier. Again, just like with Sphinx, they are showing you how to use these bushes, pulling back behind them until they're opaque and shooting through them. And these low-tier tank destroyers, they maintain a lot of their camo rating after firing, so those bushes are going to add to that and help. And even though this vehicle has 15 degrees of gun depression, it wasn't quite enough there. MrRogo finishes off the SU 1:30 PM, and that is a tier 8 tank destroyer shut down by a little tier 6. And now MrRogo has to avoid the artillery, and luckily they do. It's going to be playing Battleship right now. It's just MrRogo doesn't have the indirect fire, unfortunately. But with 5 kills to their name, they spot the SU-100, and they're a one-shot as well. Here we go, baby. This is for the game. Easy money. No, disaster. It doesn't go through the side. It must have been well angled. And now MrRogo is down to only 2 armor-piercing shells, and there's 857 hit points left on the enemy team. So MrRogo definitely has to fire an AP shell here against the SU-100. Easily can go through the front of that tank if they make themselves spotted here. And then I guess they're going to have to use probably 2 out of the 4 high explosive rounds if they hit them against the artillery. Because those artillery, they've got about 350 hit points each. So that means that this 300 alpha damage gun, unless we get a mega roll later on, is just not going to be able to deal with them. But the HE rounds on this tank, they're not too bad. They're not too bad. 53mm of pen. I do think that maybe MrRogo takes a couple too many HE shells. But then again, you know what? Upping your alpha damage from 300 up to 380 can really make a difference in other scenarios. It might make the difference here against those artillery, right? So, MrRogo now in that 1 versus 3, and I believe they were in a 1 versus 5, so they are trying to contest the medal that everybody wants, the Kolobanos medal, but unlike Sphinx here, it's not quite the same, right? Sphinx got like a double Kolobanos medal. And interesting enough, MrRogo is going to switch to a high explosive shell here. No intuition on this tank, which is fine, but if I would definitely use intuition on a Grilla, but not on this tank. If you're training a crew specifically for this vehicle, no real need for intuition. But if you're taking your Grilla crew and putting it inside this tank, yeah, definitely. Okay, here we go. Moment of truth. HE shell. Will it connect? It does, but it actually low rolls 321 out of 380, meaning that another HE shell is going to be needed against the SU-50, so the S-51, I should say. Drama, drama, drama. Now with 4 shells left in the tank because of that awful RNG. If it happens again, they're going to need both of the shells for the M44 on the enemy team, but probably only 1 armor-piercing shell if it connects against the SU-100. But as we saw with RNG earlier, sometimes you can't count on those shells. This vehicle's gun handling, it's a little bit lackluster. You might even go as far as to say to invest an experimental turbo on this tank to try and improve it. Would I recommend using a rotation device on this tank instead of the coated optics? Might be a little bit too far. On a close quarters combat map, you even might want to try and slap a durability device on this vehicle just so you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive with your tracks. But really, I think the bread and butter build on this vehicle is going to be the one that MrRogo is using, with the flexibility of using those coated optics depending on how many field mods and crew skills and the premium consumable you use. So the siren goes off. 2 minutes left on this battle. Will MrRogo be able to take this one down, or is this just going to be an epic last stand with an absolute fat game in the worst possible matchmaking for the Dickomax? So it looks like MrRogo changes to an AP shell. I think that's probably the correct thing to do right now against the SU-100. And if the M44 appears, well, then fire 1 AP, load the next HE for the M44, and then fire that last AP shell with your last possible chance against the SU-100. And the SU-100 has gone all the way round and tried to flank. Would you look at that? Sneaky devil on the enemy team. Doesn't just drive out in front of our hero. And MrRogo down to a 1-shot with 118 hit points. The SU-100 also down to a 1-shot. This game is neck and neck, but I tell you what, knocking down that tree wasn't very sensible. Now the enemy team will know exactly where MrRogo is. Maybe the artillery will be able to splash in, or maybe the SU will start to blind fire. So the SU crests the ridge, exposing the top of their tank, and they just don't quite have the gun depression, unlike the Dickomax, to be able to find a shot over that ridge. MrRogo gets forwards. Well, the SU gets forwards against MrRogo, I should say. MrRogo doesn't fire because, again, they've only got 2 armor-piercing shells left. They've got to connect one of these. And unfortunately, it looks like with only 33 seconds left on the game, MrRogo is just going to have to try and deal with destroying just only half of the enemy team, right? And that's if the SU pokes out. Unless, by some miracle, they've... Oh, my word, the SU's pushing these Stridsvagn right now. MrRogo maybe go. Oh, there he is. He's going to find a shot right through the gap there. Shut him down. Okay, 10 seconds left. Where's the M44? Come on, man. They're called Epic Ukrainian. Come on, Epic Ukrainian. Come in right at the end of the buzzer. Oh, for goodness sake. What? I bet you didn't see that one coming. The M44 was lost in battle. Actually left the game. And that means that MrRogo, even though they don't get the Radley Walters medal for finishing off the M44, they actually win the 1 versus 5. Because if you've left the battle, your tank is destroyed when the time runs out. And this is a very, very unusual victory because of that. So SphinxPit, congratulations to you on that 1 versus 11. 5 times more damage than anyone else on your team, and 13 out of the 15 kills possible. 2,300 base experience. This was the mother of all Kolobanov's medals, and I can't believe I missed this in 2023. One of the games of the year. And also a massive thank you to MrRogo93 for uploading their incredible Kolobanov's medal for standing alone against at least 5 opponents in the worst possible matchup in their Dickomax. And both of these vehicles are premium, so you can either spam gold and still make profit, or fire regular rounds and resupply premium consumables and still make a decent profit at that. And so, to conclude, which one would I get if I could either have the Dickomax or the SU-85I? I think considering they're both the same price, I'd rather have the tier 6. I'd rather get the Dickomax. I think it's the most funky tank. I think it's a little bit more fun. But I think if I wanted to just have like pure competitiveness, I'd probably get an SU-85I. But personally for me, as somebody who is a whale and has all of those, I don't have the Black Buck 3D style for the IS-22. So this is the one that I'm going to be getting on my main account. And if you want to get this style completely for free, and you don't care about the Dickomax or the SU-85I, just tune in to twitch.tv/QuickyBaby on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays until the middle of April. Collect your tokens and visit the store in-game. Anyway, that's it for today, ladies and gents. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy these epic Kolobanov's medals, make sure you give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know which of these 2 vehicles you would pick from the token store and why. And all that's left to say is looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow on the 3rd of March as the token store opens up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.